All right, welcome back to episode 2 of In Between Generations with Dr. Lena and
Dad.
we are happy to have you back on this second episode. This episode we will be talking about
My baby.
and we will be talking about all things what was Lena like as a child. We'll have the opportunity to hear my dad talk a little bit about parenting. And I will also share some of my parenting experience when it seems appropriate. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, what kind of kid was I?
Well, you were a great kid. Quiet around people pretty much. And pretty entertaining around your family. Very articulate for your age. We talked about every subject. And you usually had an understanding if I kept the language where you could understand, and you had some intelligent and insightful responses.
Yeah, some of the stories I remember, especially about articulation. I think there was this one time my niece was saying she took me somewhere and everybody was impressed that at such a young age I knew my full name. And people would say, "What's my name?" And I'd be like, "Lena Gail Dowdell." And they just thought it was wonderful that a kid knew their full name, which I think the bar is low. I think the bar is really low that children know their name. But I guess I found out as a teacher, sometimes kids don't know their names. They know their nicknames. I mean, sometimes we don't even know people's real names. We just know their nicknames. So, so you talked about me being articulate. What about being outspoken? Was I outspoken? What else about me as a child?
Well, I have to say you're somewhere neutral with that. You were very outspoken. Like I said, you were more outspoken around your family because of a more relaxed atmosphere for you, I guess. But if somebody asked you something and you knew the answer, you respond, and you respond appropriately. But pretty much, if you didn't know the environment and the people you were around, you were just kind of observing and taking it in, which I think, bode well for you later. Because I think you learned a lot without having to research it or ask. You just learned it by osmosis, so to speak.
Would you say I was more like you or mommy growing up?
Let's say you were like me. You pretty much would be like me your whole life, inquisitive, like I said, somewhat articulate, and funny, silly, so to speak sometimes. And you know how I value a sense of humor.
Yeah, I think also like school-wise, one thing about my dad and I both, I don't think we spent a whole lot of time studying. We could look at something, memorize it pretty quickly, learn it, and then take the assessment. Langston has definitely picked that up. It's so annoying. It is so annoying. Because as a teacher, you're taught certain ways to teach things or skills, and it really drives me crazy when I think he hasn't studied enough or done something, and then you quiz him and then he knows it, and you'd be like, dang
it. Now, her mother, my wife, was real jealous of that because we went to school together, of course, and she always says, "Well, you never studied anyway, and you still got an A." Well, damn. What can I tell you?
Hate the player, don't hate the game, don't hate the player.
Just like my daughter said, I could look at something, read it pretty much, and I had a grasp of it. She was the same way. My grandson is definitely that way because I usually help him with spelling. I don't really help him. I let him look at the words. Maybe he might copy them 4 or 5 times. Then I quiz him. He knows them. 25 words. Yep. So it's a wonderful curse.
It is. It breeds a little procrastination because why study now when I can just cram later?
Yep, exactly. And all 3 of us, apparently, there's 3 generations that are guilty of it.
Yeah. I want better for Langston. I want him to do a little bit more study.
Me too.
And really focus and hone in on some things. So hopefully we'll get there. What about behavior-wise? Did I get in trouble a lot? If I did, what was something I got in trouble for?
No, you did not get in trouble. You, like I said, were inquisitive, so sometimes you were told not to do something or look at something or mess with something, like any young kid, and you got in trouble. But you never got into serious trouble. I can remember spanking you, and you wouldn't remember probably, just one time in your whole life, and you're probably about 5, 6. You were running through your grandmother Bree, her grandmother on her mother's side, running through the living room, and she had a lot doesn't describe it. She had like millions of little knick-knack things everywhere, and if you bump something, you're probably going to tear up something. And she was running, and I told her, stop. And I guess she was having such a great time, she didn't stop. So I gave her a good whack on the behind, but that's the only time I ever had to discipline her physically. Usually she could talk to my child, and she would understand. And I think because of the bond we had, and I think, the love she had for me, and love I have for her, I would never say nothing or deliberately upset her. Like the one whack I had to give her, I felt terrible. She probably didn't see it, but I felt terrible about it. It didn't hurt, but I felt, just because how I felt about her. And so usually she wouldn't do anything that she knew would disappoint me. And so she was a good child.
Yeah. Perfection. That is the word. So now you know.
She was perfect.
Perfection. Lena equals perfection. So let's move on into some parenting questions. What kind of parent were you back then?
Well, here's something I said before she was born. And she helped keep me on an even keel and do some things that I normally wouldn't have done. And I'll tell you a quick story in a minute. I always said before she was born that I wanted to be an example for her. I didn't want to do nothing that would embarrass me and make her think it was all right to do something that I might do that was wrong. For instance, I never wore a seatbelt when I drove until she was born, because I always told her, I'm going to be an example. And I remember getting in the car and buckling up. And so I said, you know what, put your seatbelt on. From that time on, I never drove without a seatbelt, because as it started out as an example for her. So now I was raised in a Baptist church, but of course, like most people, when you get a certain age, I was gone, doing my thing, right? And so my wife also was raised in a different Baptist church. So she was taking her to church one Sunday. She was about 5 or 6 years old, and she always remembered, that I talked about did various things and how I was raised. So when they were leaving, they were on the way out, and she said to me, Dad, how come you ain't coming to church? And of course, me being silly, I was really embarrassed by it, because I knew right away that, I told her I was going to be an example. She wasn't thinking like that. She was just wanted me to come along. And she said, Dad, how come you're not coming to church? So I said, I'm the heathen in the family, and laughed it off. And when the door, I was been watching the game, and I said, plus I'm watching the game. As soon as the door closed, man, I felt convicted. I was tore up. I'm saying, the voice came right away. You said you were going to be an example. The next Sunday, I was in church with them, and I started going regularly. And after that, some months after that, I got saved. But had it not been for her, I'd probably still be watching the game on Sunday and not thinking about a church. So it's an example of how your kids can be an influence and can help change your life. And that was real big for me, because I'd always promised myself I wouldn't do anything in front of her or do anything that wouldn't be a good example for her.
So again, that's just an example of how perfect I am. And now I have led him into the light. Okay. I would say similarly for me, I don't know that when I became a parent, I thought about being an example as much for Langston, but I definitely wanted to be a place or a person where he felt safe, that he could have conversations. I think, and I think we can talk about this a little bit as I continue, but I think about how even in the last episode we talked about, you didn't ask your parents about banking because they'd be like, that's none of your business and all of those things. And you all were not like that with me, but I still realized as I got older, there were a lot of things I didn't know. and or that I had to kind of figure out myself, or that even now at 40 that I'm still trying to figure out, because they just weren't explicit conversations that we had. And so I knew that as a parent I wanted to be able to have conversations with Langston, similar to what you said the other day as well, that like he comes to me because I have the answer. From at the time when Langston was little, very similar to how I call my dad out, I used to tell Langston all the time, moms know everything. That was just my motto. Moms know everything. Moms know everything. So that whenever something happened, he'd be like, oh, my mom knows. I can go and ask her. So, yeah, of course, he does throw that in my face when he asked me something and I tell him I know. He said, but I thought moms know everything. Well, he's 12 now, so that doesn't necessarily work in my favor. But my point is that I always wanted him to know that I'm the one who can either help him find the correct answer or I know the answer. Because another thing I always tell him is your friends don't know anything. They're also 12.
Absolutely.
And so I don't want my 12-year-old learning about sex or drugs or anything.
Anything. Anything whatsoever.
Anything from another 12-year-old. But in turn, I also tell him when we have our conversations that are private or where I'm telling him things, I always tell him, now you don't go back to school and tell your friends, because not everybody's mom or dad or grandma want them to have this information right now. But because you asked me, and like you said, in ways that he can understand, I make sure that I share. So for me, it wasn't necessarily being an example. I kind of feel like for me that was more implied, but it was really being big on listening to him, apologizing to him when I have wronged him, which is hard sometimes because, like, you know, we're the adults, but then also being a place where he can come and ask questions without judgment or being angry, which is also really hard. I talked to my friend Annette about that a lot, just trying to be cool. Because I'm like, if you get too crazed when a kid asks you something, then they'll never ask you again, because then they think they're in trouble or it was wrong. So sometimes you just gotta close your eyes, take a deep breath, and be like, ooh, that was a crazy question. And then usually my time, the way that I bide some time is I say, well, where did you hear that? Or what do you think that means? That's my period of like regulating myself when he asks me something wild. So that's I think kind of how I've taken a little bit of your parenting and brought it into my own, because like I said, I think that all of our parents, listeners, viewers, dad, my mom, me, we all do our very best with what we have, but there's always that room for improvement. So I'm always trying to think about like what was great about my upbringing, but then what do I wish that I had a little bit more of that I could do within reason.
And just to add, one thing I learned to do early on after she was born is she was very inquisitive. 1,000 questions a minute. Dad, what does this mean? And many times, more times than not, I didn't know, but I would tell her, I don't know, let's go look it up. I don't know, let's find out. And so we would look at a lot of things together and learn a lot of things together. It's just about being honest, because, some of us, and I think this is the reason why in my generation, most stuff they didn't know. Some of it they never heard of. But that's correct. So they just chase you away, out of embarrassment, I guess, and just lack of knowledge. But I learned to just go, well, let's find out. Like if it was a word, we look in the dictionary. If it was some concept, I'd get a book or something that pertained to it, and we'd get into it. And I was definitely the better for it, and she was better for it, because by the time she got a certain age, she was knowledgeable about a great many subjects that adults are stupid about. I'll just say it like that. A lot of us adults are just stupid about stuff and too proud to ask anybody. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. Even Langston, I learn so many things. Sometimes he tells me things and I'm like, how did you even know that? But the way that we had the encyclopedia is how they have the internet. You can just Google anything at any moment. And now with AI and ChatGPT and Claude, the answers are literally like at your fingertips automatically.
By the way, some of you who are 20-somethings or maybe even 30-something, but definitely 20-something, an encyclopedia is a book.
You're right.
Encyclopedia was a whole volume of books from A to Z that covered the subject you want to know about, anything. You look it up in an encyclopedia. Yeah, that was our internet.
Yep, that was it. And what was really crazy is that not every letter had its own volume. So like S's, there were probably like 2 S's because it'd be like S-A to S-R and then S-R to S-Z. And it might be this thick, that big. And that was all the information. And if you didn't find it there, then where was it? It wasn't anywhere. It was in the encyclopedia.
Encyclopedia.
Yep. And so that is all you had to do. You did projects. If you were doing a state project, you know how a lot of y'all get on the internet and Google Louisiana? I said Louisiana because when I was younger, it's funny. I was going to talk about something to be obsessed with later. I was obsessed with Louisiana. I had never been there. I don't know if it was because it was the boot shape, if it started with an L, if it was because it was long. I don't know what got me obsessed with it, but I was in 2nd grade and we did a states project and I chose Louisiana and I had to use the encyclopedia because there was no internet. So you go in there, told you the state bird. It was almost like, you all would know this, Wikipedia.
Yeah.
If
exactly.
Wikipedia was in a book and it was, I'm thinking of the validated or fact checked by someone because Wikipedia, you can go on there and put anything you want. No, this was Encyclopedia Britannica, so they had some experts who were sourcing the information and providing it in a book. But that's really what it was, Wikipedia in book form.
That's right.
Because it would give that information just like that. But it may be only 2 pages about Louisiana, and that's it.
You could rely on an encyclopedia though because it was compiled by scholars and historians. Mm-hmm. This wasn't any made up stuff.
Right.
If you go to the encyclopedia, you got the true knowledge of what you're looking for. But we were the only, as a matter of fact, there was a point where in my neighborhood, we were the only ones, because it was a poor neighborhood, we were the only ones who had encyclopedias. So people would always come up and ask, Miss Tate, Miss Hazel, could I borrow the B? And they throw the book at you. Here, boy, make sure you bring it back. Grown-ups were, and how they were at my time. Make sure you bring it right back, too. Well, I want it back by the night. But there were people, all the kids, would come to our place because we had a nice set of, we had World Book, it was called at first, and then I think we got Britannica.
Yeah, I had Britannica.
You got Britannica later, I think.
Yeah.
So
they still have encyclopedias. Go to your local library. Shout out to B.F. Jones. That's our local library. We love them. But you could go and check out an encyclopedia.
Yeah, just for your own knowledge. So you can say that, I know what it is, or I held one in my hand because time's coming when you won't even be they'll be in a museum somewhere maybe, but you won't be able to go get them.
Oh, yeah, they already have record players in museums, cassette tapes. So maybe that is an episode one day. We'll get into some old devices that are in the museum, which is crazy.
How we used to play music. You guys know what vinyl is, but there was a time when that's all we had for music. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't albums. Matter of fact, I spent a lot of time at my grandmother's house, and they partied on the weekends, and she loved music too. But at the time, it was what's called 78s. If you ever seen an album, it was a record that's smaller than that, somewhere between you probably know what a 45 is. But we'll get to this, between a 45, which had one song on it, and then albums have a number of songs on it. Well, 78 was between there. Yeah. And they were made out, and they were slaked. But this came before the 45 or any of that. They were thick, it wasn't vinyl. If you dropped them on a hard enough surface, they would shatter. The records would. But that's what we had. You put it on this, what we call turntable, that went round and round, and you put a needle from its arm on it, and it produced a sound through speakers.
Yeah, recently I showed Langston a record player because I have one at home, and I was explaining to him how to make it work, and he was like, that's too much work. And so then he was done.
he's right. Compared to the day, it was a lot of work.
Yeah, he was like, no, thank you. I mean, because now everything is streaming. But yeah, like you said, we'll definitely be getting into music because we also are lovers of music. So we have lots and lots and lots to say about music.
Absolutely.
What about parenting are you proud of?
Well, every time I look at you, I'm proud. Now, I can't take the credit for everything, but I do. I mean, that's the fun part of it. But so your daughter's so lovely. She is so smart. Yeah, well, you know, she gets honest. But I'm proud of the way my baby turned out. You know, she's a good person, a strong. You know, I see a lot of my mother in her. From that, I don't see certain parts of my mother in her. And we'll get to my mother. You won't believe my mother. My mother was a force to be reckoned with. But I see, as far as being strong, I see my mother in her. And the intelligence, I see some for me and her mother too, because my wife's a smart woman too. My wife doesn't like to be talked about, so she may or may not be on here.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is, my wife's an attorney. She's a judge now, but she grew up just like me, same kind of neighborhood. No money, but she worked her way through. Undergrad, master's, and
JD?
Yeah, JD, Jewish doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So, but she has a lot of her mother in her too, so I'm just proud when I look at her, and I can take some credit, but I can't take all credit. And you know what, some of the gifts God bestowed on her are some of the same gifts I have, and she has some, of course, that I do not have. But we talked about being articulate, and in my old age, I ramble more than I did when I was younger. But she's more articulate than I ever was. If you ask about any kind of subject she knows about, she can respond. She can respond and expound. I mean, with great articulation and flow. She didn't have to stop to think about something. It just seems like it pours forth. I developed some of that as I grew, but I never had it as naturally as her. So I'm just really proud of the person she turned out to be. And I take big credit, most of it, but, you know.
And you wonder where I get it from? That's that. I would say when you talk about the articulation, that is definitely mommy, not necessarily who she is as a person, but her making me be in all of those oratorical competitions. You're also looking at the reigning champion of the Martin Luther King Jr. oratorical contest. I know there's some version that's happening now, but from the time I could start doing it all the way to my senior year.
I was going to see that.
Clean sweep.
About 8 times my baby won.
Clean sweep. First. I was killing them.
She did.
You had to write your speech, then you had to stand up. And from a very young age, my mother had me at Sunday school doing speeches. What small, yes, afraid, no, happy Easter, now I'll go. I think it was the very first speech I ever did.
And it's 3 or something like
exactly, that. And now I'm 40, so I still remember it. But Leslie had us out there all the time. There was not a time at Sunday school, and then we had Sunday school union, so there wasn't always a lot of time to be thinking about what you were going to say because you were going to get up and say something all the time if you were with mommy.
My wife was diligent about having her involved. I may have mentioned this before, but one summer she planned and executed every aspect of Vacation Bible School when she was 14. She was 14. I was like, I still brag about that. So she gets that from me.
I've always just been so bossy. Like that is me through and through. Always organizing something and telling somebody what to do.
Yeah, she gets most of that from her mom.
It is what it is.
And her grandma, just like I said, and she's forceful like a grandma. You know, if she has to be, she comes across and, you know, everything falls into place because my mother didn't play around, man. But we'll get to that.
What would you say are some of the hardest parts of raising a kid? Or even just raising a daughter? You could give a little bit of both or all of it.
Well, as a man raising a daughter, there's just subjects and things you don't want to breach because it's like, you know, even with a grown woman, you wouldn't want to deal with certain subjects or you struggle to deal with certain things. So when you got a kid, and I know I used to be thinking, I don't want to mess this up because I don't want her And I know the faith she had in me, I don't want to teach you something stupid. Because sometimes we think we know something and we tell people, oh, we acted out and teach. And then later on you realize that was totally messed up. That was bull. But now you got to correct it, or you got to go back. But see, again, that's which is a good lesson. You can't be a parent who's never wrong. Sometimes some parents would do something they know or teach their kids something they know is wrong and let it lay so they don't look stupid. Because they got to know everything because you're an adult. You're a parent. That's not true. Just go back and say, you know what? No, sweetheart, Dad was wrong. Here's the truth. I made a mistake. I had it wrong. And your kid's going to grow up and admire you more and think more of you, I think, if they realize that you are man enough or woman enough to admit that you were wrong. Many, many parents will not. Well, and that comes deeply from my time. We'll get into that too. When I was a kid, I never remember none of the adults that raised me saying, you know what, Lisbeth, I was wrong. I messed up. Never.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one thing that I'm glad I learned, and it's, pretty much because of who she is, and her sincerity and wanting to know things. And I knew how she looked up to me. I can't be telling her no stupid stuff. And then something I know is crazy, nah.
I agree. It is really hard. I use my dad a lot because, like I said, although I said in the last episode my dad is the OG gentle parent, I know sometimes he looks at me and like, that girl just let Langston do anything, or she just let him say anything. But I promise there's a method to the madness. And I'm not that gentle. Like, I'm gentle-ish. It's only so far he can go before I'm like, all right, it's enough. And he knows when I say it's enough.
That's right.
He better quit it.
Better quit it.
That's just that. But I agree. There's just so many things. And I think more things than when I was younger. Because of social media, because of us having lived in New York for so long and the accessibility to things, it reminds me of a time where I was on the bus with Langston and he was maybe 4, and we were riding in the bus going home and he looked out and we were on 3rd Avenue and he was like, oh, somebody's getting arrested. They must have done something wrong. And I said, maybe. Or maybe they're just because they're black. And he looked at me like, what? And I know you are thinking, like, that's crazy to say to a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, but it's not, right? Like, I realize that a lot of what we see is what we believe. And I don't want him to necessarily see someone being arrested or see a police officer and immediately think that the person of color is in the wrong. And so then we just had a conversation about what it is like to be a black and a brown person. Did that stick at 3 or 4? Probably not. But since then, obviously, we've had more and more of those conversations. But there's a lot of those things that I think I've had to say to Langston because he is a boy, but also because he sees so much more than I was able to see. There were certainly racial injustices and all of that stuff that was happening when I was a kid, but we really only had television. We didn't have YouTube shorts. We didn't have TikTok. There was no Instagram, right? Like, my generation, we created all of those things. So there was a lot less, I think, that came up like those things. Even something as much as like consent is a conversation that I've already had with Langston about no means no. And that's simple, right? People probably think like, why would you have consent with and he was younger than 12, but with a 12-year-old, right? Because everyone thinks consent automatically is connected to having sex, which it is not, right? So at a very young age, he knows that if someone says, no, I don't want to play, then that means no, you don't play with them. No, you cannot touch that, then no, you cannot touch it, right? And that is consent, very simply. And so he's not confused at 12 when someone says to him no. That means, oh, let me go find something else to do. And I told him they can change their mind tomorrow, but then it's not your job to try to convince them in that moment that like maybe they would want to play with you. If somebody say no, it's no. But those are really hard, like you said, conversations to have because then you never know what they might ask you afterwards.
That's exactly right.
And Langston is very much like me. He will ask questions like the things that kids know now. Crazy. I'm trying to think right now some of the stuff he has said to me, and I'm like, oh, did I know that at 12? And I'm like, I did not know that at 12. But I have to answer, right? Like, because like I said, I already told you, mom knows everything. And so just like my dad said, he was an example. If I know everything, then I can't be out here being like, we ain't talking about that. We got to talk about it, even if it's uncomfortable for me. If my ears get a little warm, I just have to take my deep breath and say, all right, well, we're getting into it. But I'm sure what he recently has said to me will come up. But just some of the stuff he already knows from hearing people talk about things. But also when I think about, I'm very proud of him. He is his own person. He's always been his own person. So when he tells me that, you know, they're 12-year-olds vaping, I'm like, oh my gosh. And he's like, vaping is horrible. It's bad for you. And I'm like, absolutely, yeah. And I didn't have to tell him that. He just knows that it is not good for you and it is not a thing that you should do. So it's just things like that. So I am proud of him because he's his own person. He is not persuaded or influenced by others. If anything, he's doing the persuading or the influencing of others. And there are worse influences than Langston. So I'm glad and he represents us well, for sure.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
And that's where being the type of kid that she was and that he is, articulate and outgoing, funny, you don't ask for leadership, but it happens because other kids see you and they're attracted to that and they'll follow. And so I'm proud of the fact that he influences some other kids, but in a good way, and that he has those traits. So
absolutely. What funny family stories or holiday events do you think of when you think of my childhood?
Well, one thing, I got pictures in my mind of when you were young. And I always cracked up at Halloween when you would dress up as some character and you would always be acting it out. Or like I remember you dressed up like, I don't think it was Cinderella, but it was some little girl and you were always in front of the camera posing. You know, if somebody had a camera, you were like, or Dracula, you know. And then later on, the funny thing is, my grandson did some of the same costume. He did a Dracula thing when he was little. And I know it's because he saw the pictures of his mom. You know, he couldn't believe this. I said, yeah, that's your mom. But you were always mugging. You were always mugging. And that's why it wasn't surprising to me. I'm very proud of him. We'll get to some of this later when we talk about music probably. My daughter started in every musical, that major musical that they did at her school. Like in high school, Cinderella, Oklahoma, Guys and Dolls. I mean, you name it. But I saw that when she was little. She didn't mind it because the attention was drawn to her, and if it was funny, everybody was laughing, and they would say, "Oh, how did she know? How did she memorize that?" So she's always been like that since she was young, and it just carried over to high school. And she originally, she'll talk about this maybe. She originally in school was a music major, and then musical theater. So, I mean, it's that kind of thing's just in her. She's outgoing when it comes to. And that's another reason I think she can just stand up and expound. Because a lot of kids never had to never get in front of anybody, and they're petrified the first time they do. And sometimes thereafter, especially if something bad happens, if somebody shakes their head in a negative way or laughs or something. But she grew up doing it, so it's like breathing almost to her. I'll leave it at that.
For sure. It's funny because recently Langston has gotten into theater and things like that. He's also always been theatrical and dramatic, but he does not like the spotlight on him of strangers. Like, he is very like chill and very reserved. So it's very surprising to me that he would stand up in front of people and do anything, let alone sing and dance. Or even when we went to that school board meeting he was like, well, I wanted to say something. He was like, but I wasn't sure if you'd want me to. And I was like, I didn't think you would want to. I was like, but yeah, that's really cool. So I was really surprised when he's like, oh, I definitely, he's like, when he said it, he's like, I want to say something. Go, do, absolutely. Like, use your voice to do those things. But he surprises me a lot because he is very reserved and doesn't want attention on him a lot. In certain ways, like he likes to be a comedian and tell jokes and be silly, but if it's serious, he doesn't really want people like looking at him. He doesn't want to know, if you ask him what do you think, he's not really into all of that. So that is very surprising though that he has grown into that. So maybe it's just in us.
I think so.
My dad hasn't said it, but he also did a little theater.
A little.
He did a little theater. He's also a little dramatic as well. So
yeah, I can be.
yeah. And so, what values mattered most to you as a parent raising a child?
Well, honesty for one thing, and not being afraid to express yourself. Well, that's as an adult, it was like that for me. That's what I wanted for you, because I didn't have that. When I was a kid, you better not express yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Yes, sir. That's all they wanted to hear out of you. But I'm proud of the fact that my daughter breached all of that, and she wasn't afraid to ask something. She wasn't afraid to say something if asked. And those are important things, especially when someone's young. Because if you stifle that, too many of us grow up and then we won't.
Mm-hmm.
We won't ask.
Mm-hmm.
Or we won't tell when somebody asks us. Fortunately, I was able to break from that. And we'll talk more about my generation as opposed to hers, and mine opposed to my mother's even, because some of the stuff that happened from when my mom was a girl up through me was brutal. And that was another thing I was determined. She was not going to grow up under the... Now, some stuff, I think it's almost like you're brainwashed too. Because like she said, sometimes she was disciplining or telling him, don't do, or go do something, and he's talking to her, or he hesitates, or he's a negotiator too. My grandson, now that's something I couldn't do, and she wouldn't do that either when she was young. You'll tell him, like, for instance, oh, all right, bedtime, go to bed. And then he'll start asking you about something he knows is important to you, or something that you're enthusiastic about. I said, all right, now go to bed. And he'll say, what was this you said talking to me about Jesus? She said about Jesus. And before I know it, we're 15 minutes into a conversation about Jesus.
Uh-huh.
When his butt should be in the bed, right?
Yep. Or he'll be like, oh, can I get 5 more minutes? And 5 minutes is not enough time to do anything.
That's right.
But he just wants that negotiation. He wants to feel a little bit of that autonomy. And you know what? So a lot of times I just give it to him.
And I admire that. Here's what I tell him though. Because he can be persuasive, even at his young age. I said, you can't use this for evil. You get to see? Because these are the people who know, con men and people who take advantage of people who know they're persuasive. Mm-hmm. And they know how to do it. And we talk about that a lot. I said, I don't want you ever try to trick somebody or get something for free or take a shortcut. So that's important because he does have a gift when it comes to that. So
for sure. I'm glad you said that because I think that is definitely a value that I've taken with me. I usually say like advocacy, but it's the same thing, right? Using your voice and speaking out or speaking up. It's something that I tell my students all the time. And I think it's important for people of color. To your point, I think because of the conditions in which most of us got here, or those of us who were here as the natives, right? And then their land was pillaged.
Right.
They were oppressed. We were oppressed. And to survive, you had to, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir. And so you couldn't ask a question. You couldn't
That's right.
have a rebuttal. You couldn't negotiate the things because it literally was life and death.
Yes.
And so I think not so much for my generation were we brainwashed, as you said, but it is generational because that is how you were raised. Because again, for those of you watching and who don't know history, although they're claiming that we've been free for 250 years in America, it ain't so. Newsflash. And slavery and sharecropping, right? Is not so far in the past. His mother, my grandmother, picked cotton as a teenager. Okay, and she would have been how old now? What, 80 something? Yeah, 80s, close to 90 years old. And then his great grandmother, my grandmother's mother, right?
Yeah, and she helped raise me too.
Yeah.
And she told me all this stuff. She was picking cotton at 8 years old, just like the slaves. Slavery had just ended when my great grandmother was born, but she was raised exactly like slaves. You know, they ate off the scraps. She picked cotton in an 11-foot sack. You heard of that? Not a regular sack. That sack is 11 foot. She had to fill one of those up in a certain amount of time. And she started when she was 8 years old, just like they did slaves. When you were a slave child, you got kicked out onto the cotton field and you had a quota. And so she grew up like that. And so we're lucky. That's something we'll get into at some point. A lot of how my mother was raised and how she raised me, and even some stuff like she said, some vestiges from raising her came from slavery. Like, yes, ma'am, or go do what I told you now, don't ask questions.
Yeah.
That comes directly out of slavery. You don't have a voice. Just do what I'm telling you to do. And sometimes I had to watch myself because, like she said, she's talking to her son, and she may say, okay, now go do such and such. And he'll have a question, a legitimate question. And I'll say, like, man, get out of here and do what your mom told you to do. You know, when I should keep my mouth shut, because she's raising it, and she's raising the way she's raising, and she's a great parent. But I still got that thing in me, well, do what I'm telling you, and do it now.
Yeah.
Because that's how I was raised.
Yeah. And again, like you said, and I think all of us walk around with a lot of that. And even though my dad and my mom weren't necessarily like that with me, what it looked like as an adult was, I'm in college, I needed to extend a deadline, but the syllabus says Thursday. And I know that I can't make Thursday, but I'm scared to ask because we were taught the syllabus is what it is, that's what you do, right? Even though your parents never said that to you, but we were taught to follow the rules and that we don't veer off, that we don't shift, that we don't disrupt because it's life or death. And while it is still very much life or death for us as Black people and other people of color, we are not living in those times. The life and death isn't necessarily as immediate as it was, right? And there is some level of negotiation that we get to do now, and some pushback that we get to do now, and some leverage that we have because of folks before us who have paved the way, if you will. So advocacy, using your voice, is something that, even though it may not have been explicitly even shared from my father and my parents to me, is something that I tell Langston all the time, something that I tell my students, because it is so important for you to stand up for things you believe in, stand up for yourself, stand up for good causes, and to just to advocate and ask for what you want. All somebody can say is no. All they can say is no. I tell Langston that all the time. You could ask me for whatever you want. All I can say is no. And a lot of the times it's yes, especially because, like my dad said, not with even just Langston being good at negotiating, but just sometimes, I don't want to say, I'll say that. Sometimes he's right. Sometimes what I'm saying doesn't make sense. And I have to be like, you right. And sometimes that's what I'll say to him. You right. Because again, it's that idea of like, a 12-year-old can be right, y'all.
Absolutely.
A 12-year-old can be right. 12-year-olds know something.
Right.
I tell him he doesn't know everything. You are very smart. He knows things. And so sometimes when I say, let's do blah, 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 he's like, well, why, Mom? Because if we do blah, and I'm like, you right. You got it. Thanks, bro. And then we do what he says it or how the way he has suggested. And I know that might sound a little crazy and scary. Again, if you know me and you know him and you know us, you know Langston, he don't get away with murder. But there is room to negotiate. There is room to have conversations. And then, honestly, sometimes when things are happening, I'll tell him, we're actually not having a conversation about this. This is just what it is. There is no negotiating this. It is time to do blank, or we are going here, or no, you can't do that. Sleepovers, for example. We don't do sleepovers. And he knows if somebody asks him, he usually will still tell me that someone has invited him to a sleepover. But he'll say, I know I can't do that. And he's accepted it. Usually he can go over there earlier. And again, we can talk about some of that stuff. But that's just one example of that is not a negotiation. We're not negotiating if he's sleeping over at someone's home. He ain't doing it. And he knows, and he has accepted it. But I think, again, like you said, when you have that open conversation and communication, and this goes even into work, right? Like when your team trusts you, when your son, your daughter, when your children trust you and you have open communication, they know that when it's appropriate, they can challenge, they can negotiate, and they know that if you have a firm no, then it means no. And they trust it because they're like, well, she wouldn't just say no to me if it wasn't dangerous. And of course, I always explain to him the whys to the no's. But I don't get a lot of pushback on when it's a firm, it's a decision, because he's like, well, my mom listens to me and she does say yes to a lot of stuff, and I might not like it, but or what would you say? It's right, but it's tight. It's tight, but it's right.
It's tight, but it's right.
It's tight, but it's right. That's it. And so that's just kind of how that is.
And it's good because it'll develop their self-esteem when they are older, and there is some injustice. They won't turn a blind eye to it, and they'll know that they'll know that it's all right to take a stance when you know you're right. But when the kids are growing up, they're always wrong, or get out of my face, and they don't know anything. It's gonna be a detrimental effect for when they become an adult. Take it from me, because it took me a while to say, you know what, I know I'm right. I'm not gonna, I'm not falling for what he's talking about, and then rebut, but not at first, because I was always told nope, or why are you asking me that? Get out of my face, That's how I was raised. So she's definitely a better parent than my parent was to me, and hopefully I'm better than my mom and the people that raised me.
Yeah, the bar is high. I was thinking about that the other day. I saw a girl that I grew up with. Her son turned 16 and she got him a car. And I know the reason she got him a car was because when she was 16, she got a car. And just like, and I had said to myself, like, oh man, Langston already knows that when I was 16, 17, my parents rolled up on the scene and brought me a car. So I'm gonna have to get him a car. So yeah, the bar is high when you have done monetary things as well as emotional things with your children, vacations, and all of those things are just conversations, because we talk about everything, so he knows a lot of my business. So the bar is absolutely high. Are there any parting thoughts or advice you'd want to give to someone who is parenting and maybe wants to take a shift in their parenting or be a little gentle? I feel like this is something one of my cousins and I talk about a lot. She really is trying to shift herself into a more gentle parent and more understanding parent. Something to say about that though, right? And I think people should realize that mentality of survival is also what happened in slavery, which is why it was so urgent that you listen and you do, because it was about survival. And so, no, if you're watching or listening and you are just trying to survive, we know that you're doing what you have to do in the best way that you can. And so give yourself a little bit of grace there, and knowing that, yep, maybe you're a little snappy, but it's hard to take a breath if you are worried about your paycheck being enough to cover the rent, or if your car has broken down and you didn't have enough saved, or you don't have any saved. I keep saying it and I'll say it again. Gas is $5 a gallon, y'all. And if that is any indication, we are all struggling. We are all trying to be our best and do our best. And so keep that also in the back of your mind as you're thinking about, like, I want to shift. I want to maybe be a little more gentle. I want to listen to my child more. And it's hard to listen, if they're misbehaving and you had to call out of work, and every time you call out of work, that means less money in your paycheck, and then less you can do, et cetera, right? So recognize that, and then still think about, what is it? Is it maybe just you can eat dinner together and sit down and talk? Maybe it's you can stop at the playground after work today. Maybe it's you get a special snack after school, right? It doesn't have to be you are a parent who, whooped your kid, and now today you're like, I'm never going to whoop him again. Like, no, you got to do what you got to do, how you got to do it in your house. Because sometimes every kid, gentle parenting is, a little bit different, right? But there are things you can do, I think, that get you closer to the type of parent you might want to be, so that you can cultivate what I think our relationship is, right? Like, this is work. Lisper didn't wake up yesterday and I was 40 and he was like, and now we have this relationship, right? This was work. We had to do things, both of us, to be here, to have this relationship, to have this understanding. And I'll tell you, as a child, if you don't do the work with your child when they're younger, they don't want to talk to you when they're older. They don't want to be around you when they're older. So what are some small things you can do? And again, my dad will tell you, and I'm sure he'll get into it, he got whoopings and he still loved his mom, and they still were able to have a relationship because there were other things and other ways they were able to connect. So again, I'm not saying, oh, if you yell at your kid, because I yell at Langston. Sure, I gently yell, but he gonna catch these words, okay? Right? But I'm not saying if you yell at your kid, if you send them to their room. No, I'm not saying any of that, right? We could talk about some disciplinary techniques and things like that later on. But even when you do all of that, my question, I guess, to you is, what do you do after, right? Because you can give your kid a whooping, you can yell at your kid, you can put them on punishment, but circle back to them afterwards and say, listen, I don't want to be doing this. I know you don't like it either.
You understand why I do
Right. This is, you did this and I said this. And so if you don't like this, what can we do differently, right? And so again, I feel like gentle parenting gets a bad rap, but I think for me, and maybe we're not even calling it gentle, maybe it's like restorative of some sort, right? But you're going back and you're restoring that peace, you're restoring that relationship, you're talking through it. And then maybe they'll tell you something like, yeah, I know I should have called, but then I got scared and blah. Well, next time, this is what you can do better, right? And just having that conversation. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's my advice. One step is just have a conversation. I love to ask why a kid did a thing. I like to ask why a person does a thing, because sometimes you can get to the real root of why someone has done something. I always say every behavior is communication. They're trying to tell you something.
Absolutely.
What is it? I gotta know. Even if I'm a yell, even if it's a punishment, I still need to know, why in the world would you do that? What were you thinking?
No matter what the reason, if you talk it out, it'll give you a better understanding of that person. And if you absorb, hopefully it'll develop you and give you an understanding about how you should deal in those situations. Because sometimes, I know, I'll get into this too. I didn't have a father in my life. I wouldn't know him if he walked in the room now. I had an uncle that was my example, and I love him to this day, and I have a certain amount of admiration for him. But he was a bad example, and I'll tell you why when we get into it. But I was raised by 5 women. My mom, my grandma, my great-grandma, and an aunt whose house I lived in. Sometimes I knew why, even as a kid, we got beaten. We did something wrong, but I don't know if it was whip-worthy. But that's because my Uncle Frank had just jumped on her. And she was venting.
Mm-hmm.
She'd tell you like maybe 2 times, because we lived on the upper level. Stop that bumbling above my head. Don't make me say it again. Next thing you know, she was up there with the whip, with the belt. And if you were a kid and you were there, tell whose kid you were. If you didn't get past that at the door, you got a beating. Simple as that.
Guilty by association.
By association. One time, I don't want to get too deep in, but one time my brother was there, and I don't know if he stuffed a whole roll of toilet paper in the toilet overflowed. I was in another room. She saw me coming out of that room, and she came up the steps. I got the same beating he got. But those are the things that happen, and the difference between the way I wanted to parent and the way they parented. And she was so much better than the 2 generations before. Light years ahead of what my aunt and them was. You know, I could talk to her, and she understood stuff. She didn't do bad stuff, and like I said, I only had to spank her the one time. She was inquisitive about everything, but that would turn out to be a good thing. And you just gotta listen to your kids. Because a lot of times, they're just like she said. She tells Langston, you're right, and he is right. Just like she was right a lot of times about stuff she came to me with. But I would never be told I was right when I was a kid. No matter how much, and I better not act as though I thought I was right. Because their word was law, was rule, and that was it. But they didn't know any better because that's how they were raised.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm glad I'm sure with her generation, the core was severed in the point. Because, up until me, we got it. And my cousins that I was raised with will tell you, we got it. If there's something wrong, you got it. And my aunt, the one I'm talking about, would whip you with a belt, the razor stuff, anything was handy. Throw a shoe at you if you took off running, or a coat hanger. Because I had one cousin who, when she knew the beating was coming down, she could run like the wind, she was gone. Really. But I always say the only person I've seen was my Aunt Dad, who would throw a shoe around the corner. But that's the difference. And thank God there is a difference. Because there's so many ways today. If kids' mentalities were like ours, or adults' mentalities were even like ours, there's like 1,000 more ways to kill yourself or somebody else in today's society. We'd be to wipe ourselves out if our attitudes were the same as the way I grew up.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I think we can both agree some ways, some things to do is, as parents to children, listen a little bit, listen more, talk less, take a deep breath.
You'll be better for it. You'll be smarter for it.
Yeah. And when I used to teach and when I was a school leader, I used to tell my staff all the time, every parent has their child's best interest at mind, and everybody is doing the best they can. Now, their best may not look like your best, and so I think that's where we get the tension. But everybody is really doing their best, and I think if we do a little bit more of those things and expect that people have better intentions with their children and with their families and enter into spaces that way, I think we can lift each other up and be a better village to each other.
Amen.
So with that being said, thank you for tuning in to episode 2. We look forward to talking to you all soon, more about fatherhood then and now in episode 3. And then again, just sharing more of us and some of our thoughts.